This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. America is burning. Tasmania is in the grip of a constitutional crisis. Labor is at war with itself over illegal tobacco and at war with New Zealand over vaping. Plus, the Project and Q&A are both dead. How will civilization ever survive? Over to America first, and there are two things on fire in the USA. One is the Twitter flame war between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, and the other is the city of Los Angeles. Yes, there are riots in LA again. It seems to happen every time there's any kind of dispute or unrest. And this time, Australia has been dragged into it because of the Nine reporter Lauren Tomasi, who was shot, it seems deliberately, with a rubber bullet while covering the riots. But let's just pan back from all of that and find out exactly what is going on here and why are these riots / protests happening and what are they even trying to achieve? Well, the reason why people are taking to the streets is because Donald Trump's border control officers, ICE as they're known, are removing illegal immigrants from obviously states that share a border with Mexico, mostly. And that, of course, includes California and is taking them back over the border to be repatriated from whence they came. Now, whatever your position on this, let's park that to one side. This is basically something that Donald Trump promised that he was going to do, and now he is doing it. And there are basically claims that hard left groups that have links directly or indirectly with the Democrats in California are basically trying to impede these immigration and customs enforcement, ICE, officers from seizing people, from knocking on doors and taking them back, putting them in detention and taking them back over the border. Now, what does this actually accomplish? Well, firstly, there is nothing. And again, these people see themselves as left-wing or progressive. There is absolutely nothing that is left-wing or progressive about encouraging people to get into bed with organised crimes and people smuggling cartels and make incredibly dangerous, often deadly journeys, be it, across the seas if you're coming to Australia or up through Mexico and Central America if you're going into the southern border on the US. Creating an incentive for people to do that is not progressive. That is essentially incentivizing them to risk their lives. We saw what happened here in Australia, and of course the same thing happens on the southern border in the US. The other thing is, of course, there is absolutely nothing pro-worker or pro-working class about bringing in illegal immigrants who work for incredibly cheap cash-in-hand jobs and undercut the workers who are already in the US and are often getting extremely low-paid jobs at the best of times. US wages are notoriously low compared to Australia and other countries in the West. And then you have illegal immigrants who are coming in doing cash work on the brown or black market and undercutting the rights and the wages of local blue-collar workers. And, of course, it is the menial workers, the blue-collar manual workers who are most affected by this. It's not the office workers. It's not the middle class. It's not the people who hire these guys as their housekeepers or to clean their pools. It is working-class Americans. And that is why working-class Americans in their droves turned to Donald Trump in the first place. And that is why the Democrats have completely lost sight of the working man, literally lost sight of the working man. And this is something that very nearly happened in Australia, and a lot of people I know in the Labor Party were very worried about, that the Labor was going to be taken out of the Labor Party, a party that was formed for the protection and advancement of the rights of workers, blue-collar workers. Started with the shearers' strike and the Tree of Knowledge in Queensland, or the wharfies in Balmain in Sydney. The two branches of the party are still fighting over who actually invented it. But point being, These are meant to be parties. Labor is obviously the party of the working man. The Democrats are meant to be the party of the worker, of the blue-collar, working-class America. And they do not know who that is anymore. They have completely lost that demographic. They were voting for Barack Obama in droves. And Barack Obama, by the way, was very tough on illegal immigration. He was deporting people by the thousands, the hundreds of thousands. He had no compunction about it whatsoever. And they voted for him. Those working class people in those American swing states in the Midwest, they voted for Barack Obama, and then they voted for Donald Trump. So much for them being racist, huh? They helped elect the first black president of the United States. They weren't voting because they're racist. They're voting because they were protecting their rights as workers, because they saw the Democrats as abandoning them in favour of personality politics, identity politics, all these sort of causes like, climate change that they thought was driving their industries into the ground, and so costing them their jobs. And again, these bespoke campus causes that revolve around gender or race or sexuality, all these things that the left in America is obsessed with, instead of largely white working class men. And they all went to Donald Trump. Now, we know that happened. And what is the Democratic Party in the US trying to do about that? Well, they have not actually gone and talked to any of these people. They're not among these people. They're not going down to, to Pittsburgh saying, hey, guys, what happened? Where did we lose you? They're not going to Michigan, Minnesota, Detroit. No, they go to a fancy hotel in New York where a whole bunch of millionaire Democratic donors and fundraisers and strategists sat around, and they came up with, I kid you not, a $20 million strategy. A $20 million, I believe they called it a prospectus. Again, I shit you not, a prospectus for how to identify and find and talk to the working class. And that is literally what it is. It's called Speaking to American Men. Speaking with American Men. Sorry, not to. With, because they're sharing. And this is how it's described in their own words. Quote, a strategic plan, quote again, which will study the syntax, language, and content that gains attention and virality in these spaces. Can you imagine talking to any normal person, let alone a miner or a factory worker? Imagine a coal miner from Virginia. Imagine saying, yes, we're going to study the syntax, language, and content that gains attention and virality in these spaces. These people, like all normal people, do not use words like spaces. But these guys, these millionaire donors, these rich, fancy strategists sitting in their New York hotel saying, where are all these people who didn't vote for us, these strange, they are studying them like zoo animals. It's like they want to trank one, drag them back to the lab so they can dissect it and see what makes it tick. This is how far the Democrats are removed from the working class, from ordinary Americans. And that was what a lot of people feared Labor was in danger of doing here. Thankfully, we have numpties like the Greens and the Teals who can soak up all those kind of upper middle class socialist sort of wanky votes and leave Labor to concentrate on the bread and butter. And that is how Labor has been so successful at the last two elections, by just going after basic, square, middle economic issues, cost of living issues, none of the woke stuff. The Voice, whoops, that was a mistake. Never speak of it again. But the Democrats still haven't learned that lesson. So anyway, cut to the riots and the protests that are all taking place in LA, and which are at best encouraged by and supported by huge sections of the far left and the elite left, and at worst possibly even directly supported and funded or resourced by them. Now, what exactly are they trying to achieve here? Well, guess what? Immigration. Donald Trump is struggling on a whole bunch of levels. He is in all sorts. He's got the embarrassing fight with Elon Musk. He's got no idea what he's doing on Russia. It doesn't seem to be particularly clear where he stands on Israel. Is he for or against them? He's launched a trade war with the rest of the world. It's all pissed off about it. But the one thing that people support him on, the one issue, there's only one issue that polls show the majority of Americans support Donald Trump on, and that is tackling illegal immigration. And it's on this issue where Trump is strongest and where he has the most support among Americans that the left is currently deciding to literally, physically go to war with him on. And then they blame Donald Trump for cracking down on the protesters because he's called in the National Guard. So this brings us to our reporter, Lauren Tomosi, who has been, and again, I don't know if you've seen the footage of what has happened. It is really creepy. It looks like an officer actually takes aim directly at her, lines up and fires a rubber bullet at her. And those things, yeah, they're rubber, but they sting, they hurt. And this has obviously shocked Australia. It's shocked the PM, who's raised concerns with the White House about it. But that wasn't the National Guard. They weren't Donald Trump's people who fired at our journalist. That wasn't the big bad federal bogeymen who were sent in to beautiful, progressive, Democrat-led California. That was the LAPD. That was the LAPD, which are directly controlled, directly accountable to and run by the mayor and council of LA County. Democratic LA County. These are that guy who shot the Australian journalist with a rubber bullet, seemingly intentionally. It's very difficult to find any other possible explanation just from looking at the footage as to why he did that. But this guy is a 100% card-carrying, wholly owned subsidiary of the Democratic Party. He doesn't work for Donald Trump in any way, shape or form. And yet people are still desperate to somehow blame it on the big bad bogeyman at the same time as they are going to war with him on the one issue that most Americans actually think he's doing a good job at, on the one issue that most Americans actually support him for. And that shows you just how out of touch the Democrats and the American left are with ordinary Americans. So what do they actually want to achieve by any of this? Do they want to actually change Donald Trump's mind? Do they want to actually, stop the deportation process or change the actual federal policy? Well, no, because they can't. And the fact is that the rioting and unrest that took place in America during the Black Lives Matter riots is a large part of the reason why Donald Trump got reelected. Donald Trump is president in large part because he ran on a campaign in opposition to these idiotic movements like defunding the police that everyone was saying we're going to do. And of course, the Republicans are running ads saying, you're going to call 911, no one's going to answer the phone as there's someone coming into your house. There's someone attacking you. This was a key Republican and Trumpian platform. And now they are just giving him another one because they don't want results. They don't want to change the policy. They just want to protest. They just want to show how angry they are, how noble and pure they are, how much they care, how indignant they are. And this is why you see the same kind of faces, the same kind of protesters, the same kind of rioters rioting and setting fire to buildings over, illegal immigration, deportations, Black Lives Matter, climate change, Palestine. You name it, change the cause. It's the same old faces, the same old tactics, and the same old results, which is absolutely nothing that they claim to be aiming for, and everything that plays into the hands of the right. And you know what? They don't care about that either, because that just gives them more to protest and riot about. And now to some death and destruction closer to home. Both the project and Q&A have been axed, killed, put out to pasture, taken out the back and shot, all within about 24 hours of each other this week. It was announced that first the project was going to go, it was going to finish up at the end of this month, and now Q&A, Gonski. And obviously I have pretty close ties to both of these shows, although not anymore, which is probably why they got canned, back in the day, hey? But I'm very dear friends with Sarah Harris, who's, of course, a friend of this podcast, and she is the co-host of the project, and it's probably its biggest star. Sorry, Waleed. Well, he's a big, you're more of the cerebral guy, you know. Sarah adds the star power. And of course, Q&A, I was a fairly regular guest on years ago when it was actually kind of watchable. And I've got a few insights into why, in particular, Q&A has gone the way of the dodo. And people keep talking about the balance of Q&A and the fact that it's so biased and the balance is all wrong. And they're absolutely right, except that they're both absolutely wrong, because conservatives think that Q&A is overwhelmingly biased towards the left and stacked with left-leaning panelists. But there's also a really crazy militant bunch of lefties who think that Q&A, and you can see them all on Twitter, they get all hepped up about Q&A and they get super hepped up about insiders. They think that the ABC and these news shows are all horrendously biased to the right. Yes, they think the ABC is overrun by liberal sympathisers, liberal stooges, and they bang on and on and on about it on social media every time these shows come on. It is actually incredibly painful and nauseating, but interesting to see just how fully cooked these guys are. Any deviation from the Communist Manifesto, and these guys reckon it's all, it's all, Kim Williams, evil Rupert Murdoch is taking over the ABC, or evil Channel 9 CEO taking the ABC, whatever it may be. These guys are totally, totally cooked. So at the same time, you've got the right saying this is totally unwatchable, mainstream Australia just turning off in droves because it's just a progressive inner city left-wing circle jerk in their minds. You've got all these people on the left saying, no, you're still too right-wing. You're still too... And these are the core kind of friends of the ABC audience. These are the guys who will chain themselves to trees in Ultimo and South Bank to stop anything from happening to the ABC. And they're attacking it so vociferously from the left that that's what a lot of these guys who are probably sort of part of that similar demographic anyway, who are actually putting together the shows, that's what they're listening to. So they think they're putting together something that is either balanced or, like they'll have someone like Matt Keane on who they think, well, he's an ex-Liberal minister. He's obviously of the right. And, of course, people on the right hate Matt Keane in the same way they hate Malcolm Turnbull. I quite like Matt Keane. I think he's a nice guy. But anyway, point being, conservatives do not consider him a conservative. But to someone like an ABC producer, they would think, oh, yeah, see, we've put him in. And I'll give you an example of this. So this is where I knew that perhaps the show might be in a bit of trouble, where I've been on it, again, maybe half a dozen times or something back in the old days. And one time they called me in because someone had dropped out. So they were meant to be getting an ultra-Orthodox rabbi from New York, and something had gone wrong with the travel arrangements or whatever, and he couldn't make it. And they said, would you step in his place? And I said, absolutely, fantastic, as Gore Vidal said, never give up a chance to have sex or appear on television. But when I got there, I said, and I had to say it for now, I said, you do realise you've just replaced a conservative Jew with a Labor voting Catholic. Just me being there had fully skewed what they thought was the balance. But they would have thought that because I'm not a Green Left Weekly subscriber, that I was also conservative. And of course, everyone thinks I'm Jewish anyway, and I never correct them because I need the jokes. So that's just a little sort of first-person example of how, with all the goodwill, and these guys are good people and they're going to be unemployed soon and looking for work. I'm not having a crack at them at all. But what they think is balanced is what people on both the left and the right think is horribly biased. And that is what happens when you end up sort of catering to or listening to these nutters on the extreme. You hold the middle way and you will survive. Just look at me, unlike Q&A. So one of the big issues in Australia that is constantly kind of bubbling below the surface and sometimes explodes into violence in our major cities and in, indeed, explosive public debate is the issue of illegal tobacco, which is the subject of major wars between different organised crime syndicates that import it and sell it, and vape, regulation or legislation. So whether or not vaping, which by all reports more than 1 million Australians do at least sometimes, whether that should be illegal or as illegal as it is. And this sort of double helix of this issue is just presenting a constant headache for the government. It's a constant headache for police who are trying to intercept these illegal shipments and regulate the sale of these products right across the country. And it's now kind of hit this new weird sort of nexus where you've got state health ministers in New South Wales and Victoria, possibly other state health ministers as well. They're saying, no, we need to freeze tobacco excise. It's becoming too much and it's creating too much of an incentive, I suppose, for black marketeers because the more expensive the legal product is, the more attractive the illegal product is. You've got the federal government saying, no, at least thus far. Maybe they're going to change that down the line. Then you've got the New Zealand Health Minister who's chimed in. I did not expect the New Zealand Health Minister to intrude on this podcast, but she has said, no, Australia is doing vaping all wrong. You should do what New Zealand does and other countries around the world as well, where you let retailers sell it, you regulate it, and so it's targeting ex-smokers. It's not allowed to target kids, but you let normal retailers sell it. You don't have to have a prescription or go to a chemist or a pharmacy or anything like that. And that's the way you help people to quit. Now, these remarks, she made some very measured remarks sort of publicly, but James Willis from the Daily Telegraph actually found a podcast, because people will say anything on podcasts, where she really let rip and said Australia is really stupid for the way it's going. And the numbers seem to back it up, because New Zealand's smoking rate has almost halved over the last few years from about 14 to about 7 or 8%. While Australia's has only gone down from, I think it's maybe about 11, 12, 13 to about 8%. So not as much of a drop. So we've got organised crime profiteering and profiting off illegal tobacco. We've got vapes that are illegal but should be legal according to New Zealand and other jurisdictions. And we've got on the line Theo Fakari, who is the CEO of the Australian Association of Convenience Stores, for whom this is just an absolute nightmare to navigate. And he has some pretty strong thoughts on what needs to be done and what's really going on the ground. So Theo, welcome to The Real Story. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Joe, yourself?
Yeah, look, I'm very well, mate. Have I sufficiently captured the omni-shambles that is this kind of weird, legal, illegal, black market, brown market, above board and under the counter industry that is really sweeping the nation? I mean, you can't walk down the street without 3 new tobacconists just popping up in front of your eyes, basically.
Yeah, look, you've captured it really well. And I think, Australia at one point used to be a global leader in terms of tobacco control. And unfortunately, through successive governments, what we have now is this really weird situation. So not only do we have the most expensive cigarettes in the world by some distance, you also have what many developed markets all around the world have proven both scientifically and through actual results, the most effective tobacco harm reduction device, which is vaping products. But Australia just wants to effectively prohibit one to the purchase only via a pharmacy if it's low nicotine and with a prescription from a doctor if it's higher than 20 milligrams. The facts are pretty clear, Joe. If I look at the tobacco piece, today in thousands, and it's literally thousands of stores around the country, you can buy an illegal packet of cigarettes for as cheap as $10 in a 20 size. And that same pack legally can cost anywhere between 40 and 50, depending on where you're buying it from. So, we're talking anywhere between 4 and 5 times the price because, 84% of the excise, of the price of tobacco is going to relevant taxes, excise, GST, etc. And, it's no surprise that we've got, when you combine the two together, these crime gangs, they're actually fighting over about $8 billion a year when you combine the illegal tobacco market and the illegal vaping market. So it's serious bickies here. And we're in this situation because no one stood up and said, actually, what do we need to do differently? Because our smoking rates for adults has basically flatlined. We've got massive amounts, actually record amounts in every state and territory apart from New South Wales of nicotine in the wastewater analysis. That's the government's own data. And you've got legal retailers saying, hey guys, our sales are plummeting. And you know what? It's not a problem if people stop smoking. Good on them. But that's not the case. So, as you rightly pointed out, there isn't a community in the country that the average person can just walk around the street and not see a new tobacconist popping up literally every week. And it's about time that actually the federal government stood up and listened to the people on the ground. So really proud of Chris Minns. He came out. He's the most senior politician outside of Canberra in the country. He looks after the biggest state in the country. He's not being given any support by the federal government. There's a bit of support, but not really. He has to fix the mess himself because you've got all of these illegal stores. Yep. And guess what?
And it's state cops that have to enforce these laws.
Correct. And currently it's with health inspectors. And, with respect, these are the people that go out and check that someone has the right temperature in their fridge or has the right sign up to meet the relevant guidelines for whatever the product might be. And now you've got Chris Minns saying, this is that big a problem. I'm going to have to look at diverting police from real problems.
Because the health inspectors, from memory, they've recently, I think the number has been doubled, but it's been doubled from an absolutely minuscule, we're talking like a handful of people.
Yeah, it went in New South Wales, it went from 7 to 14, and I believe there's talk it might go to 28. But, when you put it into perspective, Joe, so South Australia, pretty small state, South Australia have taken a really strong position legislatively and with their fines. So really strong, but most importantly, they're actually starting to use their new powers. But in South Australia, they actually have 38 authorised officers, dedicated, trained task force, not police, not health, but actually dedicated people that know how to deal with this organised crime piece. So for a little state, 38 inspectors, they've committed nearly $20 million in enforcement, but you've got these big states who are left to sort of address what's going on. And at the same time, it's really weird. You've got the federal treasurer who, by the way, his excise on tobacco over the last 4 years has declined from $16.3 billion down to about $7 billion this year. And that's all because people are leaving the legal to the illegal market. And what's their answer? Put the price up more.
I was going to say, so just to recap the impact. Now, I have the greatest amount of sympathy for what the federal government is trying to do. Obviously, No one wants people to smoke cigarettes, and no one who is not already addicted to cigarettes should be vaping. I'm going to quickly put my cards on the table. I was a smoker for 25 years, and I quit thanks to vaping, and that was the only way I was able to do it. And I still vape. I've got my prescription or whatever, and I get it from the pharmacy thing online or whatever. But if you look at the impact of what has happened, you've seen a decline in smoking rates that is actually less than what they've seen in New Zealand, where they've got a much more liberal approach to vaping. You've seen a decline in the actual revenue coming to government because people simply aren't paying $50 for a pack of cigarettes and they're just buying the illegal stuff anyway, so the government gets nothing. And you are seeing an absolute proliferation of both these products, as is self-evident from the sheer... I mean, if the number of legal smokers or just smokers generally is going down, why are we seeing the number of tobacconists, people selling this stuff, explode exponentially? If you can't get these vapes from anywhere but a pharmacist, why are you seeing, tobacconists, convenience? I mean, they're springing up literally all over the place. Anyone who lives in a town or a suburb or a city will have seen this with their own eyes. And they're even available. I mean, someone found a shop just around the corner from New South Wales Parliament that was selling them. So self-evidently, they're just not working. It is absolutely clear that this current framework is having the opposite effect to what is intended. Is the answer just to crack down even harder and enforce all the laws and bust all these things wide open? Is that like they're doing in South Australia? Is that a sustainable counter narrative?
The short answer is no. You can't enforce your way out of this. And this isn't just me. This is leading criminologists, people that study how do organised crime work, how do black markets work. They're saying you can't enforce your way out of this. Australia's been trying to enforce their way out of illicit drugs for a long, long time. And the reality is they're only getting about a quarter of all illegal drugs coming into the country. So, the pure definition of insanity, Joe, is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. Yeah. And that's exactly where we're at. So, currently the Australian government, in my view, is a world leader in how not to set tobacco control policy and how not to set tobacco harm reduction, because they're two different things, okay? Tobacco control, regulate, control what's in it, control where it's sold, put messages on it, convince people to stop, no problems. Their view on harm reduction is price. And, the government continues to say there's nothing globally that says putting the price down will stop an illegal market. Well, guess what? Australia has the biggest illegal tobacco and illegal vape market in the world. And Australia has the most expensive cigarettes in the world. And Australia is the only country in the world that has almost banned via prescription vaping products. So the short answer is no. And my view on this is pretty clear. You need enforcement. And you need, governments to be doing their thing. But at the moment, we've got 8 different sets of rules. Every state and territory is doing their own thing. So what we need, and successive governments have actually had inquiry after inquiry with recommendations that they've ignored. But what we need is one uniform approach run by the federal government that each of the states adopt. And we also need the AFP to manage this enforcement from the border to the shop front. We can't have all these different people doing it. So you've got to have that going on. Secondly, if you look at actually the impact of the tobacco excise and its effect on having people to quit, up until about 2018 or 2019, it was actually working because the price differential wasn't there. So our view is, at a minimum, we think that the federal government should freeze any future excises because there's another one coming in September of this year. But to get control of this, we feel as though it needs to be reduced to about the 2018 or 19 level, which is about 45% below where it's at today. So what that would do is make a packet of 20 smokes about $25 versus 10 or 15. The gap isn't 3, 4, 5 times. The gap might be 1.5 or 2. In parallel, you actually have to regulate vapes because you can't ignore the fact that if I look at New Zealand, which you've mentioned, and full credit to the New Zealand Health Minister for coming out, but you also can look at Sweden. You can also look at the UK, where they've adopted vaping as the most successful harm reduction product available. They've declined their adult smoking rates by more than 50%. They've also got the lowest youth smoking and vaping rates on record. Right, yeah. So there's proven real-world examples in Canada, in the UK, in New Zealand, in Sweden, through many parts of Europe, but the Australian government continues to just ignore it.
That's right. The crackdown on tobacco and cigarettes only makes sense if you're at the same time making vaping more available as an alternative. To crack down on both defies the point.
Absolutely. And I think over the next sort of 2 years, the illegal tobacco market will be bigger than the legal tobacco market. So what that means is the government, they've put nearly $1 billion into enforcement of illegal tobacco and vapes already, $1 billion. They're going to get to the point where any excise revenue they generate out of legal tobacco, they're going to be spending that on enforcement instead of spending it on public health outcomes, new hospitals, new school, whatever it might be.
Yep.
So, it's counterproductive and like it's so frustrating. The retailers that we represent, over the last 3 years, they've lost $1.5 billion in retail sales. But again, if people were stopping smoking, no problems. It gets worse because we're also losing that customer, not buying a drink, a coffee, a sandwich, not coming back. So the impact on legal retailers is really bad. And the most frustrating point is these shops are operating not in a dark way, in plain sight, and they get reported and nothing happens.
Yeah. So it's hurting the legal retail industry as well, and all the money is flowing into the hands of the illegal market and the crooks behind it. It reminds me a lot of the US experience of prohibition in the 1920s. And one of my favourite stories is Winston Churchill when he was visiting the US. Obviously, Winston Churchill is someone who used to have a bottle of champagne for breakfast, and he of course couldn't tolerate going to a country where he couldn't drink. And so he went there and he actually was able to drink, 2 bottles of gin a day or whatever it was because they gave him a prescription. Theo Fukari, thank you very much for joining us on The Real Story.
Thanks so much, Joe.
And finally this week, I just want to touch on this weird constitutional crisis that is unfolding in Tasmania. Now, you might have blinked and missed it, but basically the Liberal state government in Tassie is in a complete shambles. The Premier, Jeremy Rockliff's under a huge amount of pressure from infrastructure projects like the big AFL stadium and a couple of ferries that they're struggling to get done. And basically, he is losing crossbench MPs. There are rumblings within his own party that he should go as Premier. And so he's decided instead, no, I'm going to dig my heels in and I'm going to go to the governor and I'm going to ask her to call an election and we'll let the people decide. And this is seen as a suicide mission by many on his own side. I think that the Libs are going to go backwards, but Labor probably wouldn't be able to form a majority government anyway. So Jeremy Rockliff is gone to Government House. He's rocked up to the governor of Tasmania and he said, I'd like you to call an election. And the governor said, no, I don't think I will. And I don't really know how, because the convention, of course, is that the governor, like the Governor-General, acts on the advice of the head of government, the Premier, or in the case of the GG, the Prime Minister. That's why we had that little constitutional crisis in 1975 and everyone sort of agreed that it would never happen again. Well, it kind of sort of maybe is and isn't happening again in this tiny microcosm of Tasmania where the governor said, actually, I'm going to think about it. And there's a suggestion she might tell him to go back and find another premier in the Liberal Party, or that she could ask the Labor Party to form government, even though they've said there's no way they're going to form government with the Greens, so that would make it impossible. But either way, it's good to see the governor of Tassie getting up to the armpits in party room politics. Didn't think I'd see that in my lifetime. Anyway, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Leave us a review or a rating. Our ratings are pretty good, I noticed, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever the kids are listening to now. We love it. Drop me a line at therealstory@novapodcast.com.au, or you can head to the gram, hit me up at Joe_Hildebrand, slide into my DMs, or just check out my beautiful smiling face. I'm all over the papers every Monday and Saturday. You can check out my columns. And I will see you, and you will hear me next week. Take care.